Queen Xathrine of the Varathian Empire was the most powerful ruler in the galaxy, but there was one thing that all of her money and power couldn't fix. She couldn't get anyone to work for her. Not for long, though. She had let go of 47 personal caretakers in the last year alone. There were 47 different beings from 47 different worlds, and none of them had lasted more than a few weeks. The HR department of the Galactic Consortium was going crazy. At least the ones who had hair. They had done everything they could think of. They sent the Xinthians, who were known for being careful and precise with everything they did in 12-star systems. The Xinthians were around for 5 days. They then tried the Cleth, a type of animal known for being able to read people's feelings and meet their unspoken needs. The Cleth worked for 6 days before being let go. They even sent an Andromedan, which was a legendary perfectionist who could organize a supernova if you gave them enough time. The Andromedan only lasted 3 days. Every kind of animal in the consortium had a chance. All of them had failed. It was hard to understand what the Queen wanted. One day she'd yell at someone for folding towels the wrong way. The next day she'd fire someone for folding them exactly the way she told them to the day before. Her moods changed like a pendulum in a storm. No one could tell what would make her angry. It looked like she made her expectations so high that no one could ever meet them. The staff at the palace said in whispers that she liked seeing people fail. Some people said she was testing them for something, but no one knew what. Some people thought she was just mean. No matter what the truth was, the end result was always the same. A one-way ticket off the royal planet, tears and anger. When the job opening came up for the 48th time, the HR department sent out notices to every employment agency in the galaxy. They paid 3 times what they usually do. They added benefits that would make a governor of a system envious. They begged people to apply. And for 3 weeks nothing came back. No one answered. The news had spread too far. Everyone knew that this job would end your career. Then, on the last day before they had to start drafting people into the army, they got one application. Only one. It was a thin file, only 2 pages long. No fancy suggestions. No impressive qualifications. No extra training. Jake Morrison was the name of the person who applied. He was 32 years old and a person, which was already strange. The Galactic Consortium was still getting used to humans. 20 years ago, Earth made its first official contact with other planets. Most people still lived on Earth or in small colonies on the edges of known space. Jake lived in one of those colonies, a mining outpost called New Helena that most star maps didn't even bother to label. He had been a maintenance technician there for 5 years, which is a fancy way of saying that he cleaned things and fixed things when they broke. That was all. That was all he needed to do to work in the palace of the most powerful person in the galaxy. He could fix air filters and mop floors. Court was the HR director and he was from Peluvia. Peluvians had 6 arms, 3 eyes, and no sense of humor when it came to getting things done at work. Court used 2 of his arms to pick up Jake's application and the other 4 to sort through other papers. He read it once, then read it again to make sure he wasn't seeing things. "And janitor?" he said out loud, and his translator chip turned his clicking language into standard galactic common. "They sent us a cleaner? To the Queen?" Vess, a younger Peluvian who worked for him, looked up from her desk. "Is that the application for people?" "Yes. 5 years of work on maintenance. No formal schooling after what people call high school. No training in diplomacy. No experience in the service industry. Nothing." Court put the file down and rubbed his eyes with both hands. "This is what we've come to." Vess said, "We're desperate. And I've heard that people can change. They must be. For most of their evolution, their planet tried to kill them. Adaptable doesn't mean qualified. No, but what do we have to lose right now? Everyone else has already failed." Court picked up the file again and read Jake's personal statement. It was brief and truthful. Jake said that his daughter Emily was sick with a genetic condition that human medicine couldn't fix yet. The treatment was real, but it was only available on core worlds and cost more than Jake would make in 10 years of mining work. 20 years, maybe. This job paid enough to pay for it. He needed to work. He would work harder than anyone else they had ever hired. He said he would do that. Court stopped for a moment because of that simple honesty. Might have been dumb. It could have been desperation on both sides. But he took his stamp of approval and put it on the application. "Send him a contract," Court said. "Normal terms. But write a note in the file. I'm giving him 2 days. We will think it is a miracle if he lives through 2 days with the Queen." Vess wrote the contract and sent it over the quantum communication network. Jake Morrison was sitting in his small apartment on New Helena, which is about 6,000 light-years away, watching his daughter sleep. She was 8 years old and had been sick for 2 of those years. The treatments they could afford only made things worse. They didn't make any changes. The message that came in made his datapad ring. He picked it up, saw the seal of the Galactic Consortium, and his heart skipped a beat. He had sent that application 3 weeks ago and thought it had gotten lost in some bureaucratic black hole. He read it twice to make sure it was real. Then he took a long, shaky breath and looked at his daughter, who was sleeping. At the bottom it said how much the pay was. That was more than enough. More than he had hoped for. Jake signed the contract right there, and his finger shook a little as he pressed the button to confirm it. No matter how hard it was for this queen to be, he would make it work. He had no choice. It was important for Emily's life. The message changed right away. There had been plans for transportation. He would be leaving in 2 days. The palace was waiting for him. Court got the message that he had been accepted and nodded to himself. He opened a new file and started a betting pool for the HR staff. Most of them gave the person 12 hours to get fired. A few hopeful people said 24 hours. No one thought he would last the full 2 days. No one saw what was coming. No one could have guessed that this janitor from a long-forgotten mining colony was about to change everything. Not just for the queen but for how everyone in the galaxy thought about people and what made them unique. But that was still 2 days away. Jake Morrison was packing his best shirt and trying to figure out how to tell his daughter that he was going away for a while but that it would make everything better. He hoped he wasn't lying to her. He hoped he could really do this. The queen, who lived 6,000 light years away in her palace, had no idea that a person was coming. She probably would have fired him before he got there if she had known. She had talked to people before at diplomatic events. They were strange beings. Too laid back. Too willing to ask questions. Too stubborn to know where they belong. She would have turned down the application right away. Which, in hindsight, would have been the worst thing she did in her 300 years of life. On a Tuesday morning, Jake Morrison got off the transport shuttle and looked up at the crystal palace that rose above him like a frozen waterfall. It looked like the whole building was made of glass or diamonds, and it caught the light from 3 different suns and made rainbows all over the place. It was the most beautiful and scary thing he'd ever seen. The mining administration office was the most impressive building on New Helena. It was just reinforced concrete with a fresh coat of paint. He moved the strap of his duffel bag to his shoulder and walked to the front door. The bag had everything important to him in it. He had 2 shirts, 1 pair of pants, his work boots, a picture of Emily, and the little wooden horse he made for her 5th birthday. That was all. That bag held everything he had ever done. 2 huge armored figures stood guard at the entrance. The armor looked like it cost more than the whole colony. They didn't stop him. They just watched with the same blank look that professional soldiers had all over the galaxy. As he walked by, Jake nodded to them. One of them nodded back, but only a little. The other one didn't move at all. The palace was even more impressive on the inside. The floors were so shiny that Jake could see his own reflection, and all of a sudden he was very aware of his work boots. They were scratched and stained with mining dust that no amount of cleaning could completely get rid of. With every step they left small marks on the perfect floor. He tried to walk more carefully, but that only made things worse. In the entrance hall, a tall, thin person was waiting for him. It had gray skin, no mouth that could be seen, and eyes that looked like they had never seen anything surprising in their whole life. Jake didn't know this was the protocol officer yet. The being moved toward him in a way that was precise and measured, like a machine pretending to be alive. The being said, "You must be the human." Its voice came from a translator device on its chest. "Hello, I am Protocol Officer then. You need to be taught the right way to approach and speak to Her Imperial Majesty, Queen Exathrine, before you can start your duties. The greeting ritual has 17 different steps, each with its own rules for how to stand, speak, and—" "Sorry to bother you," Jake said as he looked around the entrance hall. "But where do you keep the supplies for cleaning? Things like mops and solvents. I should probably get going." Then stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. The protocol officer just stared at Jake for a long time, as if he had started speaking in a language they didn't know. "Excuse me?" Jake said again, "The cleaning stuff. Am I here to work? I should probably know where the tools are, then. Unless you want me to just start with something like organization. I'm open." "You can't just start working," then said, and the voice that was translated had a sharp edge to it that made it sound like the being was about to panic. "You must first learn the right way to do things. You need to know how to talk to Her Majesty, how to move around her, and how to follow orders. You can't just ask where the cleaning supplies are." "Why not?" Jake wanted to know. "I mean, I'm going to need them at some point, right?" Before then could say anything, before the protocol officer could list all the ways this person was already failing, a door at the end of the hall opened. It felt like the room's temperature dropped by 10 degrees. It was like the moment before lightning strikes when every molecule of air suddenly felt heavy and charged. Jake knew right away why 47 different beings had failed at this job when she walked into the hall. Queen Xathrine was more than just impressive. She was scary like a natural disaster is scary. You couldn't fight a hurricane. You couldn't argue with an earthquake. If you were lucky, you just made it through. She was at least 8 feet tall, maybe 9. Her skin wasn't really skin. It was something crystalline that caught the light and broke it up into 1,000 colors that danced around. Each step she took was planned and strong, and she moved with perfect grace. The worst part was her eyes. They shone with a cold blue light, and when they looked at Jake, he felt like he was being looked at under a microscope. A microscope that is very angry. "You," she said, and her voice sounded like ice breaking on a frozen lake. "Are you the human?" Jake nodded and kept his duffel bag on his shoulder. "Yes, ma'am." "Jake Morrison. You have a nice place here. All these windows must make it hard to keep clean." Then made a noise that the translator couldn't understand. It came out as noise. The queen's eyes turned into thin slits of blue fire. "You will call me your imperial majesty. You will bow down until your forehead touches the floor. You will not speak unless someone else does, and when you do, you will use the formal address rules of the Varathian court. You will." Jake said, "Can't do the bowing thing," in a friendly and conversational tone. "Bad back. About 3 years ago there was an accident in the mines. A support beam broke and hit me the wrong way. Healed up mostly, but if I bend that far I'll be stuck on the floor. You know, a bad first impression? But I can nod in a way that shows respect if that works for you." Jake could hear his own heartbeat in the silence that followed. A machine hummed somewhere in the palace. Wind blew through the crystal chimes outside. But nothing moved in the entrance hall. No one breathed. Then had turned pale blue, which Jake would later find out meant terrified in Andromedans. The protocol officer looked like they had just seen their whole career go up in flames. The queen looked at Jake. Her mouth opened a little and her teeth looked like they could cut through steel. No one bothered her. No one had ever cut her off in the middle of a sentence in 300 years of ruling. No one said no to a direct order. It just didn't happen. That wasn't how the galaxy worked. But this person, a maintenance worker from a colony that no one had ever heard of, was standing there in his scuffed boots with his duffel bag, looking her in the eye calmly. Not hard. Not hostile. Just relaxed. Like they were just two people talking to each other. Jake stayed. He didn't move around. Didn't turn away. Did not say sorry. He'd said what he needed to say, and now he was waiting to see what would happen next. You learn not to give up when things got tough on New Helena. People who ran the mines and the mines themselves didn't care about weakness. You were polite but firm and you didn't let anyone push you around. It wasn't about being strong. It was about basic respect. Finally, the queen said, "You're fired," in a flat, cold voice. "Okay," Jake said with a small shrug. "But I just traveled 6,000 light years to get here, and my contract says that my shift doesn't officially start for another 10 minutes. Do you mind if I get a coffee or something first? Then you can really fire me. That way it seems more official." Something moved across the queen's face. Jake couldn't tell what it was because it was too fast. Maybe a surprise. Or being confused. Maybe both. Her head was tilted a little to one side, like a predator looking at something it couldn't quite figure out. "That door leads to the kitchen," she said slowly. "You have 9 minutes." She turned around and swept out of the hall. Her crystal body caught the light one last time before she went through the far door. Then stood still pale blue, probably trying to figure out what had just happened. Jake nodded in the direction of the queen's empty space. "Thanks," he said to no one in particular. Then he turned to them. "That way to the kitchen?" The protocol officer made a weak gesture toward the door the queen had pointed out. Jake went that way and his boots made a little noise on the perfect floor. He found the kitchen, which was about the same size as his whole apartment back home, and spent 5 minutes figuring out how to use the coffee maker. It was made for people with different hands, but he figured it out. He always got things to work. The whole palace couldn't stop talking about it for 3 weeks. The person was still there. Still working. Still alive. Everyone in the HR department had lost their money in the betting pool a long time ago. No one saw this coming. In the supply closets, the maintenance staff talked about it in whispers. While they were getting ready for meals, the kitchen staff talked about it. Even the royal guards, who weren't supposed to talk about things, looked at each other in a way that said it all. The queen herself was more shocking than Jake's survival. It had been 8 days since she had yelled at anyone. There were no throwing things or firing someone on the spot for 8 full days. The doctor at the palace really did a medical scan on her because he thought she might be sick. She wasn't. In some way she was just different. Jake kept doing things the same way he had been doing them. He didn't do what everyone else did. He spoke while he worked, and his voice filled in the gaps that had been there for years. While he mopped the floors, he told stories about Earth. He talked about the history of people while cleaning the crystal columns in the throne room. While he was putting the Queen's library in order, he talked about his daughter. One morning, he was cleaning the huge windows in the Queen's private living room. These windows went from the floor to the ceiling and were 3 stories tall. They looked out over gardens that had been designed by master architects from 6 different worlds. Jake was on a floating platform wiping away tiny bits of dust with a cloth. He was talking about the time his mining crew accidentally broke into a cave system that no one knew about. "That's where we were, right?" Jake said, not looking down at the Queen, who was reading reports. "We're drilling for minerals based on the scanner readings, and all of a sudden the drill just falls. Like totally drops. We had broken through to this huge cave. I'm talking really big. Could have fit a battleship in there." The Queen stopped looking at her data pad. About a week ago, she stopped pretending she wasn't listening to his stories. "That sounds like a risk." Jake agreed. "Oh, it was," and moved the platform to get to a different part of the window. But that wasn't the strange part. What lived in there was strange. Beetles in space. Have you ever heard of them? No. Yeah, well, we hadn't either. These things are about the size of a dog and have shells that bounce scanner signals back. That's why we never found the cave. These bugs were sending our signals back in strange ways. There were hundreds of them anyway. And they were very protective of their territory. Real territorial. Jake went to another window panel, and the cloth he was wearing made little squeaking sounds against the crystal. Spent 3 days trying to move them. You know, you couldn't just kill them. They were the first ones there. That was their home. So we had to get them into cargo containers one at a time. Used food, sounds, and lights. Whatever worked. Tommy, my friend, got bitten twice. Those mandibles are not a joke. "Why are you telling me this?" the Queen asked, putting her data pad down. Jake stopped and looked down at her. "Because you seem bored. For 20 minutes you've been looking at the same report. Thought you might need a break." "I was reading." "You kept reading the same paragraph over and over. From up here I could tell." Jake started cleaning again. "I think even queens get tired of people being scared of them all the time. You just want someone to talk to you like you're a normal person." The Queen stood up, and the light of the morning shone on her clear body. "They're not afraid of me. They are polite. There is a difference." Jake shook his head and said, "Nah. That's just fear in fancy clothes. Respect that is real looks different." Jake saw that the Queen crossed her arms when she was deep in thought. "And what does real respect look like, human?" Jake waved his cleaning cloth around the room. "Like this. Me talking to you like you're a real person. Telling you dumb stories about beetles and space. You're listening because you want to, not because you have to. And you didn't vaporize me for treating you like a normal person." He got off the platform, put it away, and picked up his bucket of cleaning supplies. "Fear makes people shut up. They agree with everything you say. They jump when you walk into a room. That's what everyone else does here. They are scared of you." The Queen opened her mouth to say something, but then she closed it slowly. Her face changed in some way. It was like watching ice start to break on a frozen pond. At first it was just a hairline fracture, but it was there. "Jake Morrison, you're very strange," she said in a low voice. Jake smiled. "Yeah, that's how people are. We don't do well with hierarchies. I guess it's too democratic. We spent thousands of years trying to figure out that it doesn't matter where you were born. Everyone is equal. We're still working on it, to be honest, but we have the basics down." He walked toward the door with his cleaning supplies, but then he stopped. "Do you want some tea? I was going to make some anyway." "I didn't want tea." "I know. That's why I'm offering to bring it instead of just bringing it." Respect. The Queen didn't say yes or no. Jake took that as a yes and went to the kitchen. He returned with 2 cups 15 minutes later. He knew what kinds of tea she usually liked, but today he brought her something different. She gave the cup a suspicious look. "This isn't what I usually drink." "I know," Jake said as he sat down in a chair that was probably worth more than his whole colony. No one had ever just sat down in front of the Queen without asking first. "But you look like you've been under a lot of stress lately. There are a lot of stories in the news about trade talks and border disputes. This tea is better for stress. It has a root in it that is supposed to help you relax. That's what the people who work in the kitchen told me." The Queen looked at him, then at the tea, and then back at him. She slowly picked up the cup and drank from it. She opened her eyes a little. "This is better. I told you." Jake kept being Jake for the next few days. He moved the furniture around in the Queen's study so that the light came in better from a different angle. He said it just made sense when she asked him why he had moved things without asking. Did she want him to move it back? No, she said. The light was really better. He brought her tea without her asking, and sometimes it was the wrong kind on purpose. You always drink the same thing, he said. I thought you might want to try something different. The other people who worked at the palace began to see bigger changes. Instead of just giving orders, the Queen started to ask questions. Instead of saying, "Do this right away," she would say, "What do you think about this?" Sometimes she smiled. Little, careful smiles, like someone remembering how to use muscles they had forgotten about. Jake was working on a squeaky hinge on one of the garden doors one night. The Queen went outside and stood there looking at the sunset. She asked him about Emily after a while. How was she? Was the treatment helping? Jake told her everything. Emily loved drawing pictures of aliens she had never met. How she dreamed of being a pilot and flying between stars one day. How she had been scared when Jake left at first, but she knew it was to help her get better. He showed the Queen the wooden horse he had made and carried with him everywhere to remind him of why he was doing this. The Queen held the little carved horse carefully as if it might break. Did you make this? Yes. Emily loved it even though she wasn't very good at carving. The Queen said, "It's beautiful," and her voice was softer than Jake had ever heard it. You're a lucky father to have her. I'm lucky to have her as a daughter. The Queen gave the horse back and her eyes looked different. The blue light was still cold, but it felt warmer in some way. More like the sky and less like ice. That night she didn't say anything else, but the next morning, Jake got a message in his room. The bills for Emily's medical care had been paid. Every single one of them. Every single credit. The message said it was from a secret donor, but Jake knew who it was. The state dinner was the most important thing the palace had done in 5 years. The grand hall was full of ambassadors from 12 different star systems. These governments controlled hundreds of worlds between them. The crystal ceiling had been polished so much that it almost glowed. The light from the floating chandeliers, which had no visible support, bounced off of it. There were long tables in the room with foods from a dozen different cultures on them. Some of the foods Jake couldn't even name. Jake wore a formal uniform that the Queen had made him wear 2 weeks before. It was strange with all the stiff fabric and extra buttons. He had said no, saying that his regular work clothes were fine, but she had used her authority over him. You are now the head of my household, she had said. You'll wear the right clothes. So here he was, serving drinks to people who could buy and sell his whole home colony without even noticing how much it cost. He carried a tray of drinks from one table to the next and nodded politely when ambassadors thanked him. Most people didn't pay any attention to him, which was fine. He didn't want to be seen. The Queen was at the head table talking about trade deals with a group from the Kelvin systems. She seemed relaxed, or at least as relaxed as she ever was at these kinds of events. She even laughed at something one of the ambassadors said, which still surprised Jake every time he heard it. He saw it while he was filling up glasses at a table near the back wall. It was just a shimmer in the air like heat waves coming up from hot pavement. But it was wrong. They made sure that the temperature in the hall was just right. That kind of distortion shouldn't happen. His brain, which had been trained by 5 years in the mines where a wrong shimmer could mean a pressure leak or broken equipment, started screaming warnings before he even knew what he was seeing. Camouflage that works. In the hall, someone was using active camouflage, but it wasn't working. Jake's eyes followed the light as it moved. There is another one close to the east entrance. And a third one, which is hard to see, is slowly making its way along the wall toward the head table. To the Queen. Down. Jake yelled, and his voice cut through the polite dinner conversation like a knife. Down with everyone. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Ambassadors looked around in a daze. The Queen's head turned quickly toward Jake, and there was surprise on her clear face. Then 3 people appeared out of nowhere and the hall went crazy. The killers wore black armor that seemed to soak up light. They moved quickly and were well trained. The royal guards acted right away, and as they rushed forward, their weapons appeared in their hands. But Jake could see what was going on and how the plan was set up. 2 of the killers were fighting with the guards to get their attention and put on a show. The third one, which was the real threat, was already on the move. Sliding between scared ambassadors and using the chaos as cover, they went straight to the Queen's table. The Queen was now standing, and a blue energy field surrounded her body, activating her personal shield. Jake knew that personal shields had limits because he had worked with enough technology. Military-grade weapons could overload them if they hit them directly. The third assassin was pulling a weapon from their back that looked like it was made for the military. Jake didn't think. There wasn't any time to think. He had to think about the odds and outcomes, the fact that he had a daughter waiting for him, and the fact that he was just a maintenance worker who had no business being a hero. He was frozen in place while he thought about the Queen dying. His body moved before his mind caught up. He let go of the tray and the drinks spilled all over the floor. He ran, pushing past a Peluvian ambassador who yelled in protest. His boots gripped the polished floor. These were the same boots that had taken him through mine shafts and maintenance tunnels for 5 years. The killer raised their gun. It was a plasma disruptor, the kind that could break through shields and armor like they were made of paper. The charging coil started to glow, which made it more powerful. The whine of gathering energy cut through the screams and yells that filled the hall. The Queen turned to look at the noise, and Jake saw the exact moment she realized what was going on. Saw that she knew her shield wouldn't be enough. Saw her face change from shock to acceptance. She had been alive for 300 years. She had lived through wars, coups, and attempts on her life before. But this one was going to work right now. Jake could see that she was going to accept it, and her body was already getting ready for the impact. He hit her like a linebacker with both arms around her waist. His shoulder hit her in the middle, and the force of the impact pushed them both to the side. Her body was denser than flesh and bone, so she weighed more than a person her size would have. But Jake had spent years carrying equipment that weighed 3 times as much as he did. He knew how to use momentum and leverage. They both fell down and Jake's body twisted so that he was between her and the killer. Between her and the gun. The Queen's chair fell over and hit the floor. Jake heard her gasp, which knocked the air out of her lungs. After that, the world burst into white light. The plasma bolt hit Jake right in the chest. It felt like a star hit me. White heat spread through his body, burning away everything else. He was in more pain than he had ever been in the mines, even more than when he broke his back or any other injury. The impact sent him flying backward, away from the Queen, and he fell to the floor like a doll thrown by an angry child. He couldn't breathe. I tried to move, but nothing happened. His vision was getting worse. White was turning to red, and red was turning to black around the edges. He heard gunfire from a long way away. The guards had caught up with the third killer. But that didn't matter anymore. Emily was the last thing on Jake's mind. He wanted her to get it. He hoped she would understand that he did this so she could have a future and the person who saved her life could keep living. He hoped she wouldn't be too mad at him for not coming home. The last thing he heard was the Queen's voice. Not a scream of fear or pain, but something worse. Something that made her feel like her whole world was coming to an end. She was yelling his name. Not human. Not the caretaker. Not you there. His name. Jake. She yelled Jake like it was a prayer, a curse, or both. Then the dark took him away and there was nothing else. The Queen crawled across the floor, and her dress ripped on the broken glass from the plates that had fallen. Her shield had gone out. She didn't mind. Guards were locking the hall, medics were rushing in, and ambassadors were leaving. She didn't care about any of it. She got to Jake's body and hugged him, holding him close to her chest. He had his eyes shut. The plasma hit him in the chest and burned his skin black. He wasn't taking a breath. Not moving. Her body was so fragile, so much more fragile than her crystal form. How had he lived this long? How did his kind even live? No, she said softly, so softly that it was hard to hear. No, you can't do this. You can't leave. The medical team came and tried to take him away from her. She growled at them, which made them back away in fear. Fix him, she said, her voice rough. Fix him now. Your Majesty, he is. I don't care what he is. Make him better. The Queen's voice got so loud that it broke 3 of the floating chandeliers. Do whatever it takes. Use any technology we have. I don't care if it's a test or if it's risky. Help him. The head doctor, a Kelvin with 8 tentacles and hundreds of years of experience, knelt down next to her. Your Majesty, I need to take him to the medical wing right away. But you have to let him go. The Queen looked at Jake's face. At the person who had told her dumb stories about space beetles. Who had given her the wrong tea on purpose. Someone who had treated her like a person instead of a goddess. Who had just jumped in front of a gun to save her life. She let him go slowly and carefully. The medical team put him on a floating stretcher and started scanning, injecting, and shocking his heart. They ran out of the hall and the Queen followed. No one tried to stop her. No one told her to stay and deal with the diplomatic crisis that was happening in her grand hall. They just moved out of her way. Jake woke up to soft light and the steady beep of medical machines. He couldn't remember where he was or how he got there for a long time. The ceiling above him was smooth crystal and glowed with a soft blue light that didn't hurt his eyes. It felt like someone had poured hot metal into his chest, let it cool, and then made him carry it around. He was breathing, but every breath hurt. That seemed somehow important. He slowly turned his head, which took more effort than it should have. The Queen was sitting in a chair next to his bed. Not standing up straight like she usually does. Not moving with the smooth grace she always had. She was slumped in the chair like someone who didn't know how to sit up straight, and her crystal-like body looked dull and cloudy. Her eyes were dim, and the bright blue glow that usually surrounded them was barely there. She looked awful. "You're awake," she said in a low, rough voice. "I thought you were going to sleep forever." Jake tried to talk, but his throat hurt like he had swallowed broken glass. He coughed, which hurt his chest, and then he tried again. "How long?" "4 days. You've been out of it for 4 days." Jake could see dark spots under the Queen's eyes when she leaned forward. They were marks on her crystal-clear skin that looked like they were caused by tiredness. "You died, Jake. Your heart stopped for 90 seconds. You were gone." The memory came back in bits and pieces. The meal. The shine. The killer. Running. Effect. Light and pain. Jake shut his eyes for a short time, then opened them again. "But I'm still here." "No. Because I wouldn't let you." Jake had never heard the Queen's voice crack before. "I begged my doctors to save you. I told them they would be in trouble. If they could bring you back, I promised them anything they wanted. Jake Morrison, I haven't begged anyone for anything in 300 years. I've never had to. But I begged you." Jake took a long time to think about this because the pain medications he was taking were still making his brain foggy. "Why?" The Queen said simply, "Because you're important. Because you became more real to me in 6 weeks than most people I've known for decades. You made me feel like a person again, which I had forgotten what that felt like." Jake tried to get up but quickly wished he hadn't. He felt pain in his chest like lightning. The Queen was right next to him in a flash, and her hand steadied him as he leaned back against pillows that automatically adjusted to support him. "Don't move too much," she said. "The damage was bad. The plasma bolt should have killed you right away. Your body is so weak and easy to hurt. I don't get how your kind lived long enough to get to the stars." Jake said, "We're stubborn," trying to smile. It looked more like a grimace. "And I guess I'm lucky." The Queen sat back down in her chair, but she kept one hand on his arm as if she needed to make sure he was really there. "Your daughter?" she said. "Emily. There she is." Jake's eyes got bigger and he tried to sit up again even though it hurt. "What? Oh, is she all right?" "She's okay. Better than okay. I took her here yesterday on the fastest ship in my fleet. And I got the best doctors in the galaxy to help her. She is completely better now. Jake, she's fine. Your daughter is fine." Tears made it hard for Jake to see. He didn't try to stop them. "Can I see her?" "Very soon. The doctors want you to be stable first. But she's been outside waiting for you and drawing pictures. So far she's made 17 drawings. Mostly pictures of you as a hero fighting monsters." The Queen's face softened. "She's right." Jake said, "I'm not a hero. I did what everyone else would do." "No." The Queen's voice was strong. "That's not right. No one else would have done it. 47 caretakers have come before you, and none of them would have put themselves in front of a gun for me. They would have been frozen. They would have figured out the odds. They would have put their own safety first. That's what smart people do." She got up and walked to the window to look out over the gardens. "Jake, I've been alive for 300 years. I've led armies. I've made deals that changed the galaxy. Trillions of beings have been afraid of me, respected me, and done what I said. But no one has ever put my life ahead of their own. Not once. Never." Jake looked at her and noticed how tense her shoulders were and how her hands were clasped behind her back. He said softly, "You asked me why I did something so stupid. There's an easy answer. You needed someone to show you that you are worth saving, not just serving." Jake couldn't quite put his finger on what the Queen's face looked like when she turned around. Maybe thankfulness. Or sadness. Or a mix of the two. "I've been alone for so long," she said in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "People treat me like I'm nothing. Like a job, a title, or a system of power. Never like a person. I got rid of all those caregivers because I didn't like what they stood for. Being alone. My separation from anyone who could just be honest with me." She went back to the bed and sat down again. "Then you came with your scuffed boots and your dumb stories about space beetles. You acted like I was someone you could have coffee with. As if you were equal. At first, I didn't know what to do about it. I wanted to fire you right away. But I couldn't because it felt so good to be treated like a person again." "You are equal," Jake said, his voice getting louder. "You just happen to have a more interesting job than most people. That doesn't make you better or worse." Just different situations. The queen laughed, which sounded like half a sob. Only a person would say that to a queen. Yeah, well, we don't do well with authority. It's sort of our thing. Jake slowly got better over the next week. Emily came to see him every day, carefully climbing onto his bed and telling him about everything she had seen in the palace. The gardens have plants from 30 different worlds. The kitchen that could cook food from any part of the galaxy. The guards who let her wear their helmets. She was happy and healthy with rosy cheeks and a lot of energy. Jake thought the pain in his chest was worth it every time he saw her. 3 months later, Jake was in the Queen's private office wearing formal clothes that fit him well this time. The Queen had just signed a paper making him the chief household advisor. This was a new title that the Varathian court was still trying to figure out. He was the first person to work in the palace in an official capacity, and the news spread through the consortium like wildfire. Jake looked at the official seal on the document and said, "I still think this is too much. I'm just a guy who fixes things." The Queen said, "You're my friend. And you're the only one in this palace who tells me when I'm being unreasonable. That's more valuable than any technical degree." Word had gotten around the whole galaxy. The person who was able to do what 47 others could not. Not through being perfect, training, or being good at diplomacy, but through being real. It was being studied by universities. It was being taught at diplomatic schools. They called it the human way. Treating everyone with basic respect, no matter what their job is. Jake taught the Queen how to play poker one night in her private rooms. Emily was sitting in a chair nearby, supposedly doing homework, but she was really just watching the game and laughing. The Queen looked at her cards very closely, trying to figure out if Jake was lying. "You're doing that thing with your eye again?" she said in a suspicious tone. "What thing?" "That tiny wrinkle in the corner. You do it when you're lying." Jake made sure his face stayed neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about." The Queen put down her cards, 2 pairs, which was a good hand. Jake sighed and showed his cards. Nothing at all. He had been lying with junk. The Queen said, "Your lies are too effective." She threw her last chips at him in fake anger. "How are you winning with hands like those?" "That's just what people do, Your Majesty. We're good at making things up as we go. Stop calling me that when we're not working." "Yes, ma'am." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "That's somehow worse." From her chair, Emily laughed. Jake smiled and began to shuffle the cards for another game. The Queen looked at him, and there was something calm about her face. Content. She felt like she wasn't alone for the first time in 300 years. She had a friend who cared about her as a person. She heard a child's laughter in her private spaces. She had poker games, bad jokes, and someone who would tell her when she was wrong. A maintenance worker from a long-lost mining colony taught the galaxy something important. People's real superpower wasn't their strength, intelligence, or technology. It was the strong, beautiful refusal to think that anyone was out of reach. The idea that everyone, from the lowest worker to the highest queen, should be treated like a person. Or at least like they were. And sometimes, just seeing someone was enough to change everything.